I'm sure that some days you feel pulled forward by what you want to become. You have these visions of who you could be, who you've always wanted to be, or who you might still become. The life you'd like to have, the version of you that feels possible somehow. And then there are other days where you feel completely frozen by the fear that you won't get there, that you're not capable, that it's too late, or that it was never meant for you in the first place. And most of us assume those two states cancel each other out, that if you start feeling doubt inside you, something must be wrong. It must mean that your dream is out of reach, or it was never meant to be. But maybe, just maybe, believing and doubting were never opposites to begin with. Maybe they were always meant to coexist. And that's what I want to talk about today in this second episode of a series on becoming everything. Welcome to The Bold Beginner, the space where you get to feel seen and heard, and where you're reminded that starting over is not a failure. This is your space to breathe, to mess up, to try again, to take it slow, and to remember that you're allowed to reinvent yourself as many times as you need. And if you're ready to take back control of your life, you're in the right place. In this series, I talk about the duality inside of us, and the dreamer and the doubter are definitely two big parts that we often, if not always, carry inside of us. The dreamer is the part of you that imagines, that wants, that reaches. The part that genuinely feels, sometimes very deeply, that nothing is impossible. The way I see it is basically the child that never fully disappeared. The child that unfortunately we're constantly encouraged as adults to suppress, because apparently dreaming big isn't cool anymore. It's not responsible or realistic. That's what I've been told a lot, and especially at school. You can't have it all. And so what's the point of imagining a life you'll never have anyway? And by the way, that way of thinking is actually incredibly deterministic, because it assumes that who you are, what you're capable of, and what you're allowed to have is already fixed, that there's some sort of predefined path, and anything outside of that is just a waste of time. It's just outside of the possible realm. But it's quite sad that this dreamer inside us is quite often suppressed, because it doesn't only bring naive or unrealistic ideas, it brings hope, projection, it brings possibility. And I'm sure you've all felt how powerful it is when your reality feels heavy. You're going through a rough time, through a dark time, something overwhelming, or you've been stagnant for a while. And oftentimes what pulls you out of it, even temporarily, is what you imagine for yourself, what you picture you could be or your situation could be. And yet, sadly, even though that's the one thing that we can hold on to in those moments, we quite often brush it off with phrases like, yeah, well, one can dream, right? And it's a shame, because everything starts there. Literally everything. Everything starts from the mind. And I don't mean that in some abstract, motivational way, but very concretely. If you just think about one thing in your life today that you're proud of, anything, a skill you have, a lifestyle choice, a relationship you've built, a family you've built, something you've created, anything, at some point you imagined it first. And even something as simple as becoming good at a craft. Maybe you saw paintings in a museum as a kid and thought, I'd love to do that one day, or I'd love to be as good at painting one day. And years later you tried, you practiced, and you improved. But the starting point was internal. It was in your mind. It was imagined. And that's the reason why the dreamer in us is often loud at the beginning of a journey, because beginnings always start in the mind. I'm purposely not bringing up names like Oprah Winfrey or J.K. Rowling, because I feel like quite often it feels a bit disconnected, because those examples are so extreme, so far away from where most of us are standing right now, that they almost become unhelpful. Like, good for them, but that's not really my life. But I just want to bring them up for one reason, and it's not to say the kind of infamous, if you dream hard enough, you'll become a billionaire. That's not the point of why I'm bringing up those names. But what's interesting, though, is that no matter the field, the background, or the level of success, all these hyper successful people describe the same starting point. And it's never talent, it's never certainty, it's never a clear plan. It's an internal vision and a sense of it's possible for me, even when nothing in their external reality confirmed it yet. And that's all of them. I haven't found any exceptions so far. But like I said, instead of staying with those extreme examples, bring it back to something much closer to you, something that you already do today and you feel proud of. Something that most likely feels normal now, that you almost undermine because it's so normal to you. And I'm 99% sure that at some point, that thing was just an image in your head. It was nothing more than a desire or a projection that you had for yourself. And you didn't know how it would work out. You just knew it mattered enough to try. And I'm really insisting on this because I feel like that's the part that people often dismiss when they say, you're just dreaming or I'm just dreaming, because psychologically and neurologically, that's where action begins. And many researchers have been working on it, including a researcher named Daphna Oyserman. She worked on a theory of possible selves and explained that when you can imagine yourself in a future state, it directly increases the likelihood that you'll take steps towards it. And that's not because there's any guarantee of success, but it gives you some sort of direction. And sometimes that's all you need to get started. So no, dreaming is not naive. It's more getting you prepared. Then on the other end, you have the doubter in us. And that's the part of you that hesitates, that questions, that pulls the brake. And usually, in my experience at least, that's when a dream starts to feel a bit too real. When it stops being just a thought and starts looking like something that you could actually act on. And oftentimes they win. Quite a lot of times, at least for me, for years, every time I was doubting, the doubts would kind of take over and I would just procrastinate things or just give up on an idea that I had. But most of the time, the doubts have nothing to do with you being incapable, lazy, not made for this, quote unquote. It's more physiological. There's a neuroscientist named Joseph Ledoux who has done decades of work on fear and the emotional brain. And he explains that our threat detection systems evolved to prioritize survival over logic. So when your brain senses uncertainty, some sort of novelty, potential social risks, it reacts first. And that's long before your rational mind reacts. And so that's why these doubts feel very convincing, because it's fast and it's ancient. So from a neuroscience perspective, doubt is often driven by the brain's survival systems. And basically parts of our brain evolved thousands of years ago when taking risks could genuinely mean death. Because if we left the group, if we failed at hunting, let's say, if we were being rejected by the tribe, it meant death. But obviously our society has evolved today and we don't need to hunt anymore. And if we are rejected from the group, we don't necessarily die. But those systems are still there. And so the way it translates today is that, for instance, when you think about doing something new, like even simple things like learning a sport, speaking in public, that's a big one, starting a project, traveling solo, changing your life in any capacity, your brain can react as if you're putting yourself in danger. So it sends very strong signals, basically telling you, why on earth would you do that? You're safe here, you have food, you have shelter, you're in your comfort zone, don't go out there and die. But obviously it sounds a bit silly when you say it out loud, because failing at public speaking or quitting a job, it's not really going to kill you, or like just chances are pretty low that it's going to kill you. But to your nervous system, novelty and uncertainty, it equals threat. And that's exactly why the doubter in us gets louder when things get too real. So usually the process is that you think for a while, it's just an idea, and then at some point it gets to something more real, like I could actually try. And most of the time, again, the doubter wins. And now I'm sure you got it. It's not because it's right, but because fear is very convincing. And I know all this may sound a bit depressing. Now you're probably thinking like, oh, well, there's nothing I can do about it. It's just physiological. It's in my brain. I don't have control over it. That's not true. There's good news around this is that it's not a fixed problem. The brain is actually very plastic and it adapts. And the best way of doing that is to expand your comfort zone repeatedly and gently, because the more you do it and the more your nervous system learns that discomfort does not equal danger or death. And over time, stress responses decrease because the cortisol levels lower and the same situations become more tolerable. And I'm sure you've noticed that before. If you do public speaking once, it's absolutely terrifying. If you do it twice, 3 times, 4 times, it gets easier and easier. The stress will still be here. There's always some sort of anticipation and stress, but it definitely decreases the more you do it. Same going to a new class, a language class, let's say. You're terrified the first few class. I'm pretty sure if you've been doing that after 3, 4, 5 months, you feel much more comfortable doing. And that's really one of the core ideas behind everything that I talk about here. It's learning how to be uncomfortable on purpose so that your life doesn't shrink around your fears. And by the way, it's also good for your life period, because obviously we know by now, without getting into details, how stress is damageable to our life and how you can lose years of stress. So the more you handle this, the more you handle your stress, the better it is for your life even. So you have those two sides to you. But where it gets interesting is when dreaming and doubting collide, so to speak, in your body. And it gets confusing, of course, because dreaming activates arousal, motivation, dopamine, and doubt, on the other hand, activates protection and stress responses, higher cortisol levels, like I mentioned before. So you end up wanting something deeply while your body is simultaneously trying to pull you away from it. And both sides feel intense. Both activate strong physiological responses. And that's why, and I'm sure you felt it before, you can feel restless, anxious, stuck. You can feel overwhelmed when you care deeply about something. And this tension created by those two sides, it creates what we call cognitive dissonance. I don't know if you've heard of that term before, but basically wanting and fearing at the same time because you don't understand what's happening. And that dissonance often turns into procrastination, self-criticism, or sometimes you just shut down completely. And on top of that, as if that wasn't enough already, culturally, some things don't help because, for instance, we glorify hustle. There's a lot of content out there that frames doubt as something to kill, that you should push through to get what you want. And it can be problematic because suppressing doubts doesn't make doubts disappear. Usually, it makes it come back stronger and it can lead to burnout too. And I'm going to give you a few keys on how to reframe your thoughts around those doubts. But one very first idea that you can reflect on is how, when you have those doubts, it usually shows how much you care. Because if you think about it, people who don't care, they rarely doubt. Because doubt is often proportional to emotional investment. So if something truly means nothing to you, there's usually no inner conflict. I'm pretty sure if you're not that interested in a topic, you will not have much tension in your body on whether you should start or not, what you should do about it. You just don't care, you move on. So in some way, a first reframe that you can do in your mind is that when you have self-doubt, it's not apathy, it's not procrastination necessarily. It shows that you care. It's some sort of emotional commitment. And overall, you want to work with yourself gently to not just force confidence, but more like creating enough safety internally so that getting out of your comfort zone feels less like a threat. And there's a few shifts that you can work on for that. And one powerful shift is when you stop judging doubt and start listening to it. And you can turn it into curiosity instead. So, simple example. If you want to start something and you start getting scared and you can feel that you're just postponing again and again, instead of asking yourself, what's wrong with me? You can instead listen to these doubts and ask, what is this reaction trying to protect? What am I so scared of? Because usually you're going to find out that doubt is a signal, but it's mixed with noise, and you need to clarify this. So the work with these questions is to separate the signal from the noise, the emotional story around it. For instance, you want to start some classes and you've just been procrastinating for a long time. You might be thinking there's something wrong with me. Or if you ask this question of what am I so scared of, some answers might be I need more information before I get started. Some signal might be I'm worried that I'm going to lose credibility if people hear me learn a new language and I'm not good at it. And the emotional story behind it is usually quite catastrophic. Like, I'm going to fail, I'll look stupid, and it just proves that I'm not meant for this. So, in practicality, this exercise is basically naming the fear instead of arguing with it. Because putting words and identifying things is honestly always the first step before taking any action, to be honest. So, that one shift alone can turn paralysis into movement because instead of only procrastinating, now you're actually taking a first step into understanding why you've been procrastinating. And that's always our ultimate goal with the bold beginner, is to turn paralysis into movement. You want to take the first step. And that first step can be as simple as asking yourself questions, identifying, putting words and putting that on paper so that you understand things better to then set proper actions in response to it. Now, additionally to that first shift that I gave you, some tip that I can give you is really to look into philosophers and what they had to say about the ways that you feel and how you perceive things around you and inside you. Because what I found out is that most of the time, most of what we experience and feel, you can be sure that already a lot of philosophers have put very precise and accurate words on it. And the way I see it is that personally, it helps me not only to feel better because I understand that I'm not alone with my emotions and that some of the brightest minds in history have been writing about it for centuries, but also what it does is that it gives me paths to work on myself and sometimes paths that I hadn't even thought of. Anyway, that's just the way that I approach it personally. So that's just a tip that I'm throwing out there. You can do whatever you want with it. But philosophically, this tension between the dreamer and the doubter, it's not new at all. So if you look into one of my actual favorite philosophical current, existentialism, thinkers like Sartre or Kierkegaard, they argued that uncertainty is inherent to being human and that meaning in our life comes from choosing despite it, not after it disappears. And I'd even add up to that, and I'd say that if you have no doubts at all, you can actually be pretty certain that you're doing something wrong. Either you don't care enough about what you do, or you're staying very comfortably in your comfort zone. And sure, nothing wrong happens when you stay in your comfort zone, but it gets quite boring. And some people are fine with it, great for them. I'm pretty sure that's not how you feel if you're listening to this, though. And there's also many Eastern philosophies that emphasize holding opposites at the same time, kind of balancing strength and softness, fear and desire, action and acceptance. And the idea in those philosophies is not to resolve those tensions, but more so to live with it without collapsing, to take action while still feeling fear, to move forward without the need of being certain. And so, in that perspective, from Taoism, Buddhism, these philosophies, inner conflict is not a sign that something's broken. It's more a sign that you're actually engaging with reality as it is, with all its complexity and its contradictions. So feeling both hope and fear doesn't make you inconsistent, it makes you complex. And complexity itself is stable. Hopefully I'm not going all over the place and you see where I'm going with this, but the idea is really to integrate both the dreamer and the doubter in you and to let both exist. The dreamer becomes your direction, it's your vision. And that doesn't mean that every dream needs to be followed, of course. I'm not going to be here telling you like follow each and every dream that you have, any idea that you have, but none of them should be killed though. The doubter, if you handle it properly, becomes nothing more than a boundary. When you develop that awareness that we discussed before, when you put words on your doubts and you understand the signal that is trying to convey to you, doubt becomes more of a firewall. You learn to distinguish real warnings from primitive, quote unquote, death alerts. And it's really important for me to really make sure that these parts work together because then something shifts and there's less internal resistance. Then you can take action, and your action becomes more sustainable, and they even become inevitable. So overall, you don't need to silence the doubter to honor the dreamer, and you don't need perfect confidence to move forward. I think it's really something that's going to come back in many episodes of this series, but most of your growth will not happen from choosing one voice or one identity over the other. It will come from learning how to listen to both without letting either take over, because both deserve to exist.